When people think of World War II, they picture tanks, trenches, and gunfire. But here's the shocking truth nobody talks about. Behind every battle, every retreat, and every moment of survival, there was one unglamorous problem: food. What did soldiers actually eat while fighting the largest war in history? Feeding millions of men across multiple continents was one of the war's greatest challenges. Meals had to be portable, long-lasting, and cheap. Flavor? That came dead last. And yet, these rations shaped morale, revealed cultural values, and in some cases determined whether an army could keep fighting at all. Let's start with the Americans. The U.S. Army's answer was the so-called miracle box, the K-ration. It was small, calorie-packed, and designed to fuel a soldier for an entire day. On paper, it worked. In reality, it was more like edible disappointment. Breakfast often came as a tin labeled ham and eggs, but the taste was something closer to drywall mixed with Spam. Crackers so hard they could chip teeth were washed down with instant coffee and a packet of powdered lemonade that no one asked for. And because this was the 1940s, every meal came with cigarettes. Nothing says "good morning" like a half-cooked egg substitute and a Marlboro. Lunch wasn't much better. Soldiers opened cheese spread that had more chemicals than dairy, choked down biscuits that doubled as building material, and bit into a chocolate bar so dense it could stop a tank round. Dinner? Usually beans or meat in a can that looked more like a crime scene than a meal. And tucked inside the ration pack was one lonely sheet of toilet paper. One. Make it count. If that sounds bad, wait until you hear about the D-ration bar. At first glance, it looked like chocolate. But the army had it engineered to be deliberately disgusting, so soldiers wouldn't eat it unless they were actually starving. It was bitter, rock hard, and infamous for breaking teeth. Some soldiers swore it wasn't food at all but a weapon, useful for hammering in tent stakes or knocking sense into a stubborn comrade. Yet it packed 600 calories in a single bar, enough to keep a starving man alive. Barely. And yet, the Americans still had it better than most. Soldiers learned to swap parts of their meals like prisoners trading contraband. Cigarettes for chocolate, crackers for cheese, anything to escape the horror of ham and eggs. But every so often, a Hershey bar appeared. Real chocolate, real comfort. For one bite, a GI wasn't stuck in the mud of Europe, he was back home. That moment alone made the rest of the ration worth enduring. Now let's cross the battlefield to the German side. At the beginning of the war, German rations were almost luxurious. Rye bread, sausages, cheese, butter, marmalade. It was practically a picnic compared to the American brick-in-a-box. Field kitchens followed units, serving soups, stews, and even dumplings. Soldiers ate 3 hot meals a day, and morale soared. Bread especially was sacred. One veteran later recalled that losing proper bread felt worse than losing a bed. But that golden age didn't last. As the war dragged on, supply lines collapsed, and Germany entered what soldiers bitterly called the age of ersatz imitation food. Coffee was replaced with roasted acorns and barley, a brew that smelled like despair and tasted even worse. Bread was stretched with sawdust, straw flour, and potato starch until it resembled insulation more than food. Butter vanished, replaced by a greasy white paste known as ersatz margarine. And meat? That became a guessing game. Some tins contained beef, others horse, others... Well, let's just say the labels were vague for a reason. Even sausages, the pride of German cuisine, were corrupted stuffed with plant filler, horse scraps, or whatever was left over. Soldiers joked that biting into one felt like chewing damp newspaper. On the Eastern Front, it got even worse. Men boiled potato peels, caught rats, or bartered valuables for a single piece of chocolate. By 1943, the once proud Wehrmacht wasn't running on efficiency. It was running on cabbage water and desperation. But if German troops were eating misery, their Soviet enemies were surviving on something even harsher. If German soldiers were chewing through ersatz bread in desperation, their Soviet enemies were enduring something even harsher. Because the Red Army's approach to feeding its men was brutally simple. If it filled your stomach and didn't kill you instantly, it was dinner. The official ration looked passable on paper: black bread, cabbage soup, buckwheat porridge, a few potatoes, maybe dried fish, and unsweetened tea. But on the battlefield, that list was more of a wish than a promise. Soldiers often received nothing more than a hunk of coarse bread the size of a fist and a ladle of watery cabbage broth. Meat was listed in regulations, sure, but in reality it was as rare as a warm bath in Stalingrad. Cabbage became the Soviet soldier's eternal companion. Soup, stew, fermented, shredded it. It showed up in every form, every meal, every nightmare. Some joked that they dreamed of turning into turnips just to escape it. Hunger was constant. Men licked grease from old tins just to taste fat, boiled frozen potatoes stolen from abandoned farms, and foraged berries or tree bark when rations failed to arrive. But here's the shocking part. Despite living on fumes and cabbage fumes, the Red Army kept fighting. Soldiers turned deprivation into a badge of honor. They joked about their rations, sang songs about dried fish, and bartered whatever scraps they had: cigarettes for bread, socks for potatoes, a spoonful of jam for loyalty. On paper, their meals were miserable. In reality, their survival was proof of sheer cabbage-fueled stubbornness. Now, across the Channel, the British Army had its own food war to fight. And trust me, if World War II were judged on cuisine alone, Britain would have surrendered to its own menu. British soldiers didn't eat, they endured. Their standard rations revolved around three infamous items: tea, hardtack biscuits, and bully beef. Tea was sacred. It wasn't just a drink, it was morale in liquid form. Soldiers brewed it in helmets, mess tins, even shell casings, anything that could hold boiling water. Sometimes there was no milk, no sugar, just brown water and optimism. But still, tea kept men sane. Then there were the biscuits. Dense, chalky slabs of flour so tough they doubled as improvised armor. Soldiers joked that more teeth were lost to biscuits than to enemy bullets. They'd smash them with rifle butts just to make them edible. And bully beef tinned corned beef with the texture of cat food and the flavor of regret. Salty, oily, and soul-crushing, it could be fried, sliced, diced, or eaten cold with enough emotional numbness. Add in powdered eggs that tasted like chalk, tins of jam that glued jaws shut, and prunes that haunted the latrines, and you've got a meal that was less about nutrition and more about punishment. Yet the British clung to their rituals. They joked, they grumbled, and above all, they brewed tea. Soldiers risked sniper fire to boil water. Because no matter how grim the food, that steaming cup gave them a taste of home and a reason to keep calm and carry on. But if the British soldier had tea and the German had ersatz, the Japanese soldier had something else entirely: rice and suffering. The Imperial Japanese Army was built on endurance. Soldiers were taught that hunger was honorable, that suffering was part of duty. Convenient, because most of them were perpetually starving. The standard ration was rice mixed with barley, dried fish, pickled plums, and maybe soy sauce concentrate. It was neat and organized, but hopelessly insufficient for men fighting in brutal jungles. Supply lines collapsed constantly. Humidity spoiled rice overnight, rats ate through sacks, and fish went rancid before it even reached the front. Cut off from supplies, soldiers turned to the jungle for food. And here's where it gets shocking. Many ate boiled roots, wild plants, lizards, or insects. Some boiled leather, some gnawed on bark. A few units, tracked for weeks, were even rumored to resort to cannibalism. That's how desperate things became. Yet, Japanese soldiers rarely complained. Starvation was seen as proof of loyalty. They endured moldy rice crawling with weevils, calling it extra protein. They treasured pinches of miso paste, sips of powdered green tea, and pieces of hard candy like gold. Calories were low, morale was lower, but cultural discipline kept them going. The jungle didn't feed them. It punished them. And yet they fought on. War may destroy cities, but it also forces hungry, desperate soldiers to become chefs of the impossible. Across every front, men didn't just eat their rations, they battled them, traded them, and reinvented them in ways that were sometimes brilliant and sometimes horrifying. American G's turned K-ration crackers into pancakes by mixing them with powdered eggs and coffee creamer, frying the result over tiny fires. It tasted like despair, but at least it was warm despair. Cheese spread melted into beans became trench fondue. Spam, the most mocked of all meats, was sliced, fried, and shoved between biscuits to make sandwiches that were both depressing and legendary. Even chewing gum found new uses, sealing leaky canteens or bribing a buddy for a cigarette. The British weren't far behind. With their indestructible biscuits and endless tins of jam, they created jam buddy sandwiches, 2 biscuits glued together with jam until their teeth gave up. Some squatties mixed bully beef with dried fruit, proudly naming the concoction Desert Delight. Others tossed everything unidentifiable into a single pot and simply called it stuff, because no one knew or wanted to know what was in it. On the Eastern Front, Soviet soldiers reached new levels of improvisation. They boiled cabbage in helmets, roasted stolen German sausages over campfires, and even used empty shell casings as soup pots. One veteran recalled crying and laughing at the same time after finding a single tin of marmalade in an abandoned village. It was that precious. The Japanese, too, made do with almost nothing. Rice scraps were refried with pickled vegetables to form onigiri-style cakes. Dried seaweed, when it appeared, was hoarded to flavor water when nothing else was left. In some units, soldiers boiled the same handful of rice 3 times, creating a starchy gruel they nicknamed jungle glue. These meals weren't gourmet. They were survival magic. Little acts of defiance against hunger that reminded men they were still human, even if their food sometimes fought back. But here's the part most people forget. Long after the guns went silent, long after medals were packed away and uniforms grew dusty, the food stayed with them. Veterans carried the memory of their rations like scars. A single bite of bully beef could transport a man straight back to a muddy trench in France. The smell of cabbage soup was enough to summon the frozen hell of Stalingrad. A tin of Spam wasn't just Spam, it was fear, hope, and survival in a can. Some remembered with dark humor. American vets joked that the D-ration bar was harder to chew than German bullets. British soldiers swapped tales of trying to trade their biscuits with locals, only to be laughed at. One Soviet veteran swore he couldn't eat bread for years, not because he hated it, but because it had become too sacred to treat casually. And then there were the care packages, the treasures from home. Chocolate bars, dried fruit, letters tucked inside cookie tins. They weren't just food, they were lifelines. A taste of normal life in a world that had forgotten what normal meant. Of course, not all memories were sweet. One GI claimed he could still smell Spam every time it rained. Another joked that powdered eggs haunted his nightmares more than enemy gunfire, because in war, every bite burned itself into memory, for better or worse. That's the forgotten truth of World War II. Battles were won with bullets, yes, but they were survived with biscuits, cabbage, rice, and Spam. So the next time you rip open a snack without thinking, remember those soldiers freezing, starving, and laughing bitterly over rations that barely kept them alive. For them, every bite wasn't just food. It was a reminder that they were still here, still human, still fighting. And the taste of that survival, it never really left.